Welcome back. Economic diversification is vital to stimulating growth in the country, as PNG is too dependent on the extractive sector. Think tanks have agreed that the need to boost infrastructure development to help improve other sectors, such as agriculture and tourism, is vital.
If you look at the possibility of diversifying the economy, the first one that comes to mind, and I'm sure you agree with that, Prime Minister, is agriculture. Yes. There's been so much talk about agriculture in the last few years. Everybody agrees on that, but very little action on the ground, according to the operators. Yes. Why is that? Why is agriculture always on the headline, but very little implementation?
Well, basically because government's interventions in the past, there's been wasted a lot of resources and funding. Let me give you an example of the last government's National Agriculture Development Program. Over 400 million kina was set aside for agriculture development. That money, today if you find out, the money is spent, but today if you ask me or anybody in the country which particular commodity was grown, where is the plantations, or where are the businesses that borrowed this money to develop their business, almost zero. So we are not going to repeat those kind of wastages where people come with paper applications for agricultural projects and then get funding and you don't see the project. So our government is approaching it in a different manner. We are funding money through Agriculture Bank to lend it at a very low interest rate, so people take ownership of these borrowings. Mm-hmm. It is not free because the repayments will help another Papua New Guinean, another business. So we're trying to reduce the interest rate and increase the long-term repayment. So 20, 30 years, so that the businesses have a real opportunity in growing. Because if you squeeze the terms, increase the interest rates, and if the low repayment terms, you will find that the business is struggling because there's no cash flow. So we are trying to have a structured approach in that manner in developing the agriculture. One of our other big challenges is availability of land.
Yes.
3% of our land is owned by the state. 97% is owned by customary or traditional owners. Our government is trying to protect their ownership, so we are trying to have a lease-back arrangement. So Papua New Guineans do not lose the ownership of the land. The generations in the future can continue to own the land. All they have to do is lease that to the business or to the state, and we will then make sure that these projects begin to be developed. And the third issue is we are more also wanting to work on the successes in the past. When you look at block concepts in the country, whether it's for coffee or cocoa or copra, or oil palm is the most successful one. When you have seen this in New Britain, where the block oilers are producing oil palm and selling it onto the main producer, which is the New Britain oil palm. There's a huge economy that is developing around this. These are sort of concepts that government is trying to say. Yeah. Register your land voluntarily, you have complete ownership of it, establish a block ownership structure. We're encouraging investors to come in, and where government wants to give security to the investor, because some investors are nervous in going into traditional ownership of land and going into remote areas. Yes. So we as government, we are saying, listen, we will come in as an equity partner in the first few years, and after you get started and you're comfortable, you can repay our money back. So we'll come in as a small partner to give you security.
Yeah, you get security basically to the deals, but I think the question will be also to empower these people, not to make them just passive investors. And I think that's the challenge for Papua New Guinea, because we were talking before about those numbers of GDP growth, which are important, valuable from an economic perspective, but at the end of the day, human development index is actually even more important. And Papua New Guinea has a particular challenge when it comes to that, consider 80% of the population living in rural areas. So your challenge will be to make them active participants and not passive participants, because as we've seen in the past, that formula does not work.
We know that we have to transition our people from subsistence farming to a commercial farming. And that is a huge transition for some people, because they have no experience in business, managing of businesses, keeping accounts, making sure that loans are paid. Those are huge challenges to an average Papua New Guinean who is living in a rural community. We have to right at the back of some of the successes we've had in the past. Like as I've said before, Agriculture Bank had some huge successes. We used to have a company called National Plantations Management Agency, which provided management services of plantations for traditionally owned by individuals. And especially for coffee up in the highlands, our first multimillionaires were from that concept. But some governments in the past abolished that. So we are now reviving that.
The SMEs policy is very important in relation to that, but also at the same time is striking a bit of a negative note among the international community. They sense a little bit of protectionism, nationalism behind it. Would you defend the SME policy the way it has been presented?
Well, I think international investors, especially the genuine ones, understand that there are certain capital structures where investment is very small. Papua New Guineans can do it. We don't necessarily need to go out and raise an investor to come in and invest in those areas. Where businesses that have got huge capital demand, this is where we need investors to come in, or huge technology demand. So like anywhere else in the world, if you want to go to Australia and start a business, you'll have to go through a range of issues. It appears that in PNG, people will come in and start a business at any time.
That's true.
Or buy a land or own a home at any time. So we will try and structure it so it's legally correct and comparable to everybody, best practices around internationally. And one of the initiatives that we are trying to do is trying to put in a foreign FIRB, Foreign Investment Review Board. That is so anybody who wants to invest must get clearance from that board. And that happens in any developed economy around the world. That is protecting the interests of the citizens. So it's not necessarily trying to drive foreigners away from any business or doing any business in Papua New Guinea, but there are certain businesses that Papua New Guineans can do. They don't need unnecessarily being pushed out of that sector. We have to protect their jobs. We have to make sure that they continue to maintain a standard of living.
And that's all from us tonight. For more business news, if you would like to view this episode again, visit EMTV online at the URL at the bottom of the screen. Or for up-to-the-minute business news and updates, like our page on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at BusinessPNG or on Tumblr. Until next week, have a pleasant evening. I'm Leanne Jarari, and this was Business PNG.